The proximity. Foes. The weapon that changed naval warfare. October 14th, 1944, 13:47 hours. The Philippine Sea, 180 miles northwest of Luzon. The morning sun blazed over the vast, empty expanse of the Philippine Sea, its glare reflecting off the dark blue waves. Aboard the aircraft carrier USS Randolph, lookouts scanned the horizons, their nerves taut with a familiar dread. The air was beginning to thrum with a threat they had come to know all too well. High above, a speck in the brilliant azure sky transformed into a diving aircraft, its engine screaming in a final fatal descent. This was the essence of the Kamikaze, a weapon of spirit and sacrifice that had, for months, confounded the most advanced navy in the world. The Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Commander Hiroshi Yamamoto, was a consummate professional, part of the third wave of a massive coordinated assault launched by Admiral Teo Kurita's Northern Strike Force. His mind was a cool, calculating instrument, processing variables with lethal precision. The angle of his dive, the predictable evasive maneuvers of the great ship below, the rhythmic patterns of the American anti-aircraft fire. He and his comrades had been trained to exploit the gaps in these patterns, to brave the flak in the knowledge that most shells would burst harmlessly in empty space, their fuses poorly timed or requiring a direct, near-impossible hit. For 18 months, Imperial Navy pilots had whispered of something strange, of American shells that seemed to detonate with uncanny accuracy in the air, near their aircraft, without any physical contact. But the High Command in Tokyo, upon reviewing intelligence reports and fragments of strange, electronic-laden shells, had dismissed these accounts as the hallucinations of stressed pilots or clever Allied propaganda. It was a fatal miscalculation, born of technological arrogance, and the price was about to be paid in fire and steel. What the Japanese strategists had deemed impossible was, in fact, the culmination of one of the most secret and brilliant scientific endeavors of the war. The Americans had not just improved their artillery, they had taught a shell to think. Codenamed the VT, variable time. Fuse. This device was a marvel of miniaturization and rugged engineering. Packed into the nose of a standard 5-inch shell was a complete, self-contained radar set, small enough to fit in a man's hand, yet robust enough to survive the cataclysmic shock of being fired from a naval gun, forces exceeding 20,000 times that of gravity. As the shell arced through the sky, its miniature battery activated, and it began emitting radio waves. When these waves reflected off a nearby target like an aircraft, the Doppler shift in the signal would trigger the detonator, exploding the shell at the perfect moment to unleash a storm of shrapnel within a 70-foot kill radius. This was not a marginal improvement. It was a quantum leap that transformed anti-aircraft warfare from a game of precision targeting into one of lethal area denial. The stalemate and the desperate need for a solution. To understand the revolution the proximity fuse represented, one must appreciate the desperate strategic crisis facing the U.S. Navy in late 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf had seen the first systematic use of kamikaze tactics, and the results were terrifying. Conventional naval doctrine was built around the premise that an attacker sought to survive. The kamikaze pilot, in his willing self-annihilation, shattered this premise. A single pilot, in a single aircraft, could now guarantee a catastrophic hit on a major warship. The mathematics were sobering. Traditional anti-aircraft guns, relying on time fuses that had to be set with exquisite precision, or on impact fuses that required a direct hit, had success rates of only about 3% against a diving aircraft. American task forces were like lumbering giants, their immense firepower rendered almost impotent by swarms of determined insects. Ships like the USS St. Lo were sunk outright. The USS Princeton suffered devastating damage. The reports from commanders like Captain Wesley Harrison of the anti-aircraft cruiser USS Oakland painted a picture of futility. His ship's 16 5-inch guns, once considered the pinnacle of naval defense, could not engage enough targets quickly enough, and their time-fused shells created predictable patterns that the Japanese had learned to evade. Japanese tactical manuals, updated as recently as September 1944, were filled with techniques to exploit these American weaknesses. Pilots were trained to approach from multiple, simultaneous angles, to time their dives to coincide with gun reloading cycles, and to use evasive maneuvers that wasted American ammunition. They operated with the grim confidence that their sacrifice would be successful. This confidence was the bedrock of the entire Kamikaze strategy, and American Naval Command, from Admiral Chester Nimitz on down, watched with growing alarm as their entire Pacific strategy, reliant on amphibious operations and sustained naval gunfire support, was threatened by a tactic they seemed powerless to stop. The miracle of American ingenuity and industry. While Japanese intelligence concluded that American anti-aircraft technology had reached its ceiling, a monumental secret effort was reaching fruition. The proximity fuse was born from an unprecedented collaboration between academia, industry, and the military, orchestrated by the National Defense Research Committee and spearheaded by scientists at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory, led by the brilliant Dr. Merle Tuve. The engineering challenges were staggering. Vacuum tubes, the fundamental components of electronics at the time, were fragile glass objects. The team had to reinvent them, creating ruggedized, shock-mounted versions that could withstand the violence of a naval cannon's firing. They had to design a miniaturized radar transmitter, receiver, and power source that would fit inside a shell's ogive and operate flawlessly for the brief duration of its flight. The solution was a work of art in precision engineering, a device that transmitted continuous waves and, using the Doppler principle, could distinguish the closing velocity of an aircraft and detonate at the optimal moment. The industrial mobilization was equally breathtaking. Companies like Eastman Kodak manufactured the fuse bodies, Sylvania produced the specialized tubes, and Western Electric handled final assembly. By October 1944, the American industrial juggernaut was producing over 100,000 of these complex electronic devices every month. Each fuse underwent 17 separate rigorous tests developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories, ensuring a field reliability rate of over 85%, a phenomenal achievement for the era. Security was paramount. The fuses were shipped in sealed containers, and gunnery officers were told only how to use them, not how they worked. Unexploded rounds were to be recovered or destroyed at all costs to prevent the secret from falling into enemy hands. The day the sky itself became hostile. October 14th, 1944. The stage was thus set for the decisive confrontation. Admiral William Bull Halsey's Task Force 38 was the target of one of the largest kamikaze attacks of the war. On this day, Captain Robert Anders of the USS Stockton received authorization to break out the classified VT-fused ammunition. As Lieutenant Kenji Nakamura led his formation of over 100 aircraft towards the American fleet, he employed the tactics that had brought so much success. They approached in a coordinated multi-vector dive, expecting to weave through the predictable patterns of flak. What they encountered was something entirely new. At 1403 hours, the forward batteries of the USS Stockton opened fire. The first salvo was not a series of puffs of black smoke scattered across the sky, but a wall of perfectly timed, air-bursting fury. The first shell detonated 67 feet from Nakamura's cockpit. To the American gunners, it looked like a premature explosion in empty air, but to the Japanese formation, it was an incomprehensible catastrophe. Nakamura's aircraft simply disintegrated, shredded by shrapnel from a blast that seemed to have no cause. Within seconds, the sky was filled with these magic explosions. The first salvo of 12 shells destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft, a hit rate of 33% that defied all previous military logic. Radio intercepts by American intelligence units captured the rising panic in the Japanese pilots' transmissions. "Shells are exploding in the air. There are no targets nearby. The sky itself is killing us." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. These were men who had mentally prepared for death by flying directly into their targets. They had not prepared for death by an invisible, unknowable force that killed them before they could even begin their final dive. Their courage, their training, their sacrificial ethos, all were rendered meaningless by a technology they could not comprehend. By 14:30 hours, the attack had been utterly annihilated. Admiral Kurita's strike force lost 63 aircraft without a single kamikaze managing to hit its target. The tactical revolution was absolute and irreversible. The aftermath, strategic collapse, and a new era of warfare. The consequences of that afternoon echoed far beyond the immediate battle. The proximity fuse did not just destroy aircraft, it shattered the very foundation of Japanese naval aviation. Post-war interrogations of survivors like squadron leader Yoshio Tanaka revealed a force plunged into demoralization and terror. Pilots who had once volunteered eagerly for suicide missions now requested reassignment. The core premise of guaranteed success had been obliterated. Japanese intelligence, stubbornly clinging to their assessment of American technological limitations, initially dismissed the pilots' reports as combat fatigue. This second-order intelligence failure compounded the disaster, preventing them from adapting or developing countermeasures. The Psychological Warfare Division of the U.S. military eagerly amplified this fear, broadcasting messages about invisible defensive barriers and automatic sky mines, further eroding Japanese morale. By December 1944, Japanese naval aviation had effectively ceased to be an offensive threat. The weapon had achieved what thousands of tons of conventional shells could not. It had made the airspace around an American fleet a guaranteed kill zone. Admiral Raymond Spruance noted in his reports that Japanese aircraft were now actively avoiding engagement, a complete reversal of their previously aggressive doctrine. The strategic implications were profound. The proximity fuse ensured American naval dominance for the remainder of the war, protecting the fleet during the critical invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. It saved countless American lives and arguably made the planned invasion of Japan less likely. In the broader scope of history, it marked a watershed moment. It was the first smart weapon, demonstrating that the integration of advanced electronics could decisively overcome numerical and even tactical advantages. It established the model for post-war military-industrial academic collaboration and laid the foundational principles for the precision-guided munitions and modern air defense systems that define warfare today. The battle fought on October 14, 1944, was not just a victory of ships and men, but a victory of scientific imagination and industrial might. A moment when the very nature of combat was forever changed. The reverberations, demoralization, and strategic paralysis. The demoralization that began in the skies over the Philippine Sea in October 1944 rippled outward with devastating effect, corroding the very core of Japan's military machine. The kamikaze, conceived as the ultimate psychological weapon meant to terrify the American sailor, had its psychological foundation utterly demolished. The weapon designed to break American will instead broke the Japanese spirit. Pilots who had mentally prepared themselves for a singular, glorious moment of impact, a death that had tangible, destructive meaning, found themselves being swatted from the sky anonymously and efficiently, their sacrifice rendered meaningless before it could even be consummated. This was not the honorable death they had been promised. It was a futile erasure. Post-war interrogation transcripts with senior Japanese commanders, like Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, are filled with a sense of bewildered resignation. He confessed to Allied interrogators that the proximity fuse had created an insurmountable wall around American task forces. Our most dedicated pilots, our most carefully planned attacks, simply ceased to exist before they could strike. He stated, "We had no counter. We did not even fully understand what we were facing. It demoralized our aviators to the point where the efficacy of our entire aerial strategy, conventional and kamikaze alike, was called into question." This admission from the highest level confirms that the VT fuse was not merely a tactical improvement. It was a strategic weapon that neutralized an entire domain of Japanese offensive power. The impact on Japanese industrial and scientific policy was equally profound, though too late to alter the war's outcome. Reports of the mysterious American weapon prompted crash research programs, but Japanese scientists, operating under severe resource constraints and a less integrated military-industrial academic complex, struggled to replicate the technology. Their efforts were hampered by the Allies' devastating strategic bombing campaign, which targeted industrial and research centers, and by a critical shortage of specialized materials. While they understood the basic principle of radio wave proximity, creating a device that could survive the firing of a naval gun was beyond their reach in the time they had. This technological gap highlighted a broader strategic weakness. Japan had bet on the courage of its warriors, while America had bet on the ingenuity of its scientists and the power of its industry. By late 1944, that bet was being collected. The broader legacy, from the Pacific War to the modern battlefield. The success of the proximity fuse resonated far beyond the final year of World War II, establishing a foundational paradigm for modern warfare. Its development proved that complex electronic systems could be miniaturized, ruggedized, and mass-produced for battlefield use, a concept that would define the Cold War and the digital age that followed. The organizational model pioneered by Dr. Vannevar Bush and the Office of Scientific Research and Development, a close, direct partnership between the government, top-tier universities, and private industry, became the blueprint for post-war American technological supremacy, leading to advancements in radar, computing, and ultimately, the space program. In direct military terms, the principle of the proximity fuse became standard for air defense across the globe. The first generation of surface-to-air missiles, like the American Nike Ajax and the Soviet S-75, were essentially scaled up, guided versions of the concept, using proximity fuses to ensure their warheads would destroy fast-moving jet aircraft without requiring a direct hit. Today, every modern air defense system, from the Phalanx CIWS that protects ships from anti-ship missiles to the warheads on interceptor missiles, relies on some form of proximity detonation. The VT fuse made the direct hit obsolete, and in doing so, it redefined the geometry of aerial combat from a single line to a volume of space. Furthermore, the fuse can be rightly considered the great-grandfather of the smart weapon. It was the first munition to contain its own sensor and decision-making logic, autonomously determining the optimal moment for detonation. This conceptual leap, giving a weapon eyes, paved the way for the laser-guided bombs of Vietnam, the GPS-guided JDAMs of the Gulf Wars, and the seeker-heads of modern cruise missiles. The men who developed the VT fuse at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere had, in essence, planted the seed for the revolution in military affairs that would transform warfare half a century later. Ethical and historical reflections. The story of the proximity fuse also invites profound ethical and historical consideration. On one hand, it stands as a testament to how technological superiority can save lives. In this case, the lives of thousands of American sailors and the countless more who would have been lost in a potential invasion of the Japanese home islands. It shortened the war and reduced overall casualties, a goal of any ethical military command. On the other hand, it presents the chilling efficiency of technological disparity. The Japanese pilots, for all the fanaticism they are often associated with, were young men sent on a one-way mission against an enemy that had developed a weapon they could not see, understand, or counter. The fight was, in a very real sense, asymmetrical, not in numbers, but in scientific understanding. This raises enduring questions about the nature of courage and its place in modern conflict. Can human bravery and sacrifice prevail against an automated systemic kill chain? The Battle of the Philippine Sea in October 1944 suggests a grim answer. Today, the legacy of the proximity fuse is preserved in museums like the Smithsonian, where it is displayed not just as a relic of engineering, but as a turning point in military history. It serves as a permanent reminder that the course of war can be altered not only by the bravery of soldiers on the front lines, but also by the quiet work of scientists in laboratories. The impossible American technology that the Japanese High Command dismissed as propaganda ultimately became the key that unlocked the defensive stalemate in the Pacific, clearing the skies and securing a victory that was as much a product of intellect as it was of industrial might. In the end, the weapon that thought changed the way the world thought about weapons. The Cold War and the institutionalization of innovation. The reverberations of the proximity fuse's success extended deep into the post-war geopolitical landscape, fundamentally altering the calculus of superpower confrontation. In the nascent Cold War, the demonstrated potential of American techno-scientific prowess served as a stark warning to the Soviet Union. It was not merely that the United States possessed a powerful weapon, but that its industrial academic complex possessed an unparalleled capacity for rapid, paradigm-shifting innovation. The Manhattan Project had demonstrated the ability to harness fundamental physics. The proximity fuse demonstrated the ability to mass-produce technological miracles. This dual capability shaped Soviet strategy for decades, forcing a focus on espionage and a desperate attempt to match American innovation, often through replication rather than organic development. The institutional framework that birthed the fuse, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, became the archetype for a new form of permanent military scientific partnership. The RAND Corporation, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and the network of national laboratories are all intellectual and organizational descendants of the OSRD. The lesson was clear: national security in the modern age was inextricably linked to continuous, state-funded scientific advancement. This created a self-perpetuating cycle of innovation, where military needs drove fundamental research, which in turn spawned new technologies that created new military capabilities and, eventually, commercial applications. The transistor, the integrated circuit, and the very architecture of the modern digital computer all received critical early funding and impetus from defense contracts, a lineage traceable back to the need for smaller, faster, and more reliable components for systems like the VT fuse. Doctrinal evolution and asymmetric response. On the tactical and doctrinal level, the fuse's impact forced a complete re-evaluation of aerial and naval strategy. The U.S. Navy, having witnessed the near invulnerability conferred by the fuse, began to design its fleets and battle groups around the principle of layered, integrated air defense. The concept of a defensive bubble, created by carrier-based fighters, long-range radar picket ships, and proximity-fused anti-aircraft guns, became the standard for power projection. This doctrine reached its zenith with the Aegis Combat System, a fully integrated computer-controlled defense network that can be seen as the ultimate evolution of the principle first put into practice in 1944, using sensors and automated decision-making to create an impenetrable shield. Conversely, potential adversaries were forced to innovate in response. The Soviet Union, recognizing the futility of challenging the U.S. Navy in the air, invested heavily in alternative asymmetric systems designed to overwhelm or bypass these defensive bubbles. This led to a massive focus on submarine warfare and the development of long-range, sea-skimming anti-ship missiles like the P-15 Termit. The entire philosophy of their naval aviation shifted from dive bombing and kamikaze-style tactics to launching standoff missiles from beyond the range of the fleet's defensive systems. Thus, the proximity fuse did not end the evolution of threat and counter-threat. It simply shifted it to a new, more technologically complex domain, catalyzing the age of missile warfare. The psychological precedent and modern cognitive warfare. The psychological dimension of the weapon also established a precedent for future conflicts. The concept of shock and awe finds an early precedent in the utter confusion and demoralization inflicted upon the Japanese. Modern warfare increasingly relies on creating what military theorists call cognitive dominance, paralyzing the enemy's ability to understand and react to the battle. The use of stealth technology to create an unseen threat, cyber warfare to disrupt command and control, and drone warfare to impose a constant, faceless lethality are all modern manifestations of the same principle demonstrated by the VT fuse, that defeating an enemy's will and capacity to fight is as much about information and perception as it is about physical destruction. The ethical debate surrounding the fuse also foreshadowed contemporary dilemmas over autonomous weapons. While the fuse's decision was a simple matter of physics, a radar return meeting a specific threshold, it represented the first time a munition decided for itself when to kill. This began a philosophical journey that today places us at the brink of debating lethal autonomous weapons, laws, or killer robots. The same fundamental question persists. At what point does the delegation of lethal decision-making to a machine cross an ethical line? The proximity fuse sits at the very beginning of this slippery slope, a relatively simple automation that nonetheless set a crucial precedent. Conclusion: the human element in technological triumph. Finally, on a human level, the story of the proximity fuse is a powerful reminder of the hidden turning points in history. The courage of the sailors on the decks of the USS Randolph and USS Stockton is undeniable, but their survival, and the survival of thousands of their comrades, was secured by the unsung work of physicists, engineers, and factory workers thousands of miles away. It underscores the multifaceted nature of victory in modern total war, which demands not just bravery on the front lines, but brilliance in the laboratory, efficiency on the factory floor, and foresight in the halls of government. In conclusion, the detonation of that first VT-fused shell on October 14, 1944, was an event whose shockwaves transcended the immediate destruction of a single Japanese aircraft. It was a detonation that echoed through time, shattering established military doctrines, forging new institutions of innovation, and setting in motion technological and ethical trajectories that continue to define the nature of conflict and security in the 21st century. The sky over the Philippine Sea was cleared not just of enemy planes, but of old certainties, making way for a new and more complex era of warfare governed by the relentless pace of technological change. The weapon that could think ultimately forced the world to think differently about the very essence of power.